I believe it's a battle for the soul of America. I believe it is a battle that says that what kind of country are we going to be now? Are we going to be one that listens to Latinos, Asians, African Americans, Native Americans, gays, lesbians? Or are we going to be a country that is authoritarian, homogeneous?
Access denied. Censorship of community media is happening across the country, from Hawaii to New York City.
I think fear is behind all censorship.
Fear of loss of funding for community media outlets is a major reason for censorship.
We get calls and somebody doesn't like a particular program that they see on the channel. The first thing they ask is, well, how are you funded?
Besides money, politics, sex, and other fears of society also lead to censorship of community print, radio, and television. But there are ways to fight back.
Because if you don't want to lose it, you've got to use it. If you don't want to lose it, you've got to use it. If you don't want to lose it.
Community media began through letters to the editor and evolved into free speech messages and PSAs on radio and television. Finally, the local community got access to college and cooperative radio and cable public access television.
Public access came into existence roughly 20 years ago when the cable companies used public streets to run their cable for private profit. Because of this, they had to give something back to the city. People saw this as an opportunity to have access to the electronic media, and cities required cable companies to provide free access TV in exchange for the use of public land. In the 1970s, people in New York City organized around the cable franchise and got 2 public access channels for Manhattan, over which the cable companies had no editorial control. Since that time, many communities across the country have mobilized and acquired not only channels, but studios, production equipment, and training.
The concept of public access is access to the means of production of imagery, access to equipment, access to training, access to publicity in the newspaper.
The question of who's responsible for programming put over access channels is a hot issue right now. The Cable Act, the federal law passed in '84 that created a framework for cable regulation in this country, very clearly says that the cable company is not responsible for any programming that's put out on the public access channels. That absolves them of any responsibility, editorial liability for that programming. What the federal law is silent on is whether the city, which often created this channel because of the franchising process, or the people who manage the channel are responsible. I think a very good case can be made and is made that they're not responsible, but unfortunately the law is ambiguous.
If I wanted to say something in the show that is like, it's like bad, and no one could tell me about it because what I say in my shows is my responsibility, if it's whether it's bad or good.
The existence of community media does not guarantee free expression.
Fear is behind all censorship, whether it's economic or social, political, who knows, but fear is there, and you allay fear by trying to understand what people are afraid of and help people to get over that fear.
Lo and behold, we got this message from what they called a deep throat in City Hall that they were going to dump public access because the Klan wanted access and they could no longer block their access to the station. And they were going to do this in a business meeting at City Hall in May, late May, and then they would make the decision in this business meeting and then bring it before the full council and basically do it before there was any public discussion about it at all.
Do not try and keep them from getting on the air. That's what they want. Rally around and support the First Amendment. That's very important. Too many people have died for the First Amendment. In communities where the public access channel was strong, before the Klan issue came up, there was less of an effort to try and eliminate the public access channel. So create a viable, strong public access channel in your community, and you won't have to go through what we went through here in Kansas City.
A very tiny amount of the total of access programming has caused controversy. A lot of that controversy is either about sexual imagery or hate programming.
This public access program on an erotic art festival was cablecast on 5 different stations in the Oregon and Washington state area. Video producer Dave Slay says one of the 5 stations located in Washington state censored the program.
Ladies and gentlemen, I can't believe this.
Sexual images are not just censored in the northwestern area, but in New York City.
Monday, April 2nd, was AIDS Awareness Day on PBS. Peter Jennings, in his wonderful AIDS Quarterly, talked about the lack of safe-sex education in the country. That same night, my viewers were not allowed to see my safe-sex show because you, Dick, ordered Manhattan cable technicians not to play it. My show, targeted to a gay audience, encourages vigilance and safe sex practices. By squelching my explicit and informative communication, you have attacked all the gay men of Manhattan.
Is there any action at all to stop Manhattan Cable from censoring now, before we go into the new system? In fact, Mr. Hanks thought that my censored show was aired. So I sort of wonder what kind of communication there is.
Rick X was censored from saving lives in Manhattan with his public access programming. Twinkie was censored in Bloomington, Indiana, when Jeannie Patrick tried to make a statement against pornography.
The way I understand obscenity is that the majority of a program has to be obscene for the whole show to be called obscene.
Stop whatever it is you're doing right now, for you are about to witness scenes of the most unique, creative, and controversial form of televangelism in the United States today.
Sister Paula represents one success story on public access television. She has not been censored. Her gay and straight viewers watch her programming during primetime slots in the Portland, Oregon area.
That whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And that whosoever includes you, and it includes me as a Christian transsexual.
I'm one of the producers for the American Atheist Show, and we're on about 120 different networks around the United States. And I've dealt with a number of cases of different stations throughout the country that refuse to accept our tapes for simply not liking the content. One example where there's an 8-second sweep of just a rack of some pornographic magazines with no sexual acts of any kind at all, and they refuse to air our tape just based on that.
The link between censorship of sexual imagery and censorship of political speech is extremely important in community media today. Public access producer Scott Spurlock in Austin, Texas knows this well. His program, Dullivision, featured sexual images, and that led to a suspension of 3 months from public access equipment. Austinites spoke out at public hearings against censorship being used as a political tool, repressing unpopular ideas that threaten the status quo. Austin Cablevision even threatened to censor non-locally produced programs.
John Henry would say, "Bless you," and I say it for him, not only to the members of the City Council, but also to all of the other good folk who are down here to defend freedom of speech and the Bill of Rights. And I just hope that you all have the courage to be free and to and let us be free also. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Suzanne Donovan, and I'm the acting executive director of the Texas Civil Liberties Union, and I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to present our views on this issue. We respectfully urge you to reconsider the position and rescind the March 21st resolution directing the city's cable commission to amend its rules and procedures. The additional rules set out in Exhibit A, which were attached to the resolution, clearly describe speech that is protected under the U.S. and Texas constitutions and would result in the violation of cable access producers' First Amendment free speech rights.
ACTV board members spoke out at public hearings.
As a contractor, we will have to deal with the outcome of the resolution you have before you tonight. And we want to state just a few of our concerns regarding the wording and the implications of the changes that you're going to make in the rules and procedures. First of all, do the changes truly address the concerns over protecting minors from viewing, quote, violence, vulgar language, explicit material, etc.?
This is Austin, Texas, and Austin, Texas has slowly turned into a little Nazi Germany. You're okay as long as you don't go playing, doing anything that's considered obscene. As soon as something is considered like sexually obscene, then you've crossed the line. Don't ever show anybody having sex. Don't ever even think about having sex. Don't say anything about having sex.
This producer is still being denied access to the equipment, and the city is suing the state for clarification of who is liable for public access programming in Austin, Texas. It's interesting how fear and censorship of sexual speech is so closely related to fear of political speech.
The one newspaper that I'd like to point out that has blatant censorship, that is obviously censorship, and that is the Round Rock Leader, which is 6,000 or so circulated paper weekly in the Round Rock area. The publisher of that paper recently fired his editor. And the reason was the editor ran a story that quoted a Palestinian man saying George Bush is a liar. This was a representative viewpoint of a Palestinian living in the Round Rock area. Now the Society of Professional Journalists here in Austin has condemned that firing of the editor was a grievous censorship. Another article ran after the editor was fired. The publisher of the Round Rock Leader apologized personally to President Bush, saying that we are loyal to our troops and our president, and we support our president. Because of that propaganda that was used by our media, the public saw only one side of the story.
Censorship in community print media is common since there's no true public access to print media. The only way to get involved is through letters to the editor and sometimes contributing articles. Threats of cuts in funding are a major factor behind censorship in community print media. The Volcano Gazette in Hawaii reports incidences of censorship. Staff at the Volcano Art Center say they're having problems. The Gazette is supported by public funds, and I don't believe the park has the right to censor the paper. The problem is that our art center is located on federal park property, and I'm afraid that if I object, the art center will lose its site and facilities. They got a letter from the United States Department of the Interior, the National Park Service. Upset about community letters, the Park Service staff says, I am requesting that the Volcano Art Center provide us with the opportunity to review future issues prior to going to print. It seems they wanted control over information regarding a labor strike at the Volcano House and letters to the editor and articles regarding the National Endowment for the Arts and that funding controversy.
It seems to me that we have been afflicted by a grievous crisis that seems to fix itself unerringly, unfortunately, to the American way. The 25-year cultural crisis, which seems to take place at the National Endowment for the Arts, which is affecting us today, and I would say yes to concerns affecting the operations of public art support in the state of Texas, which still finds itself in a 55th per capita ranking out of all the states and territories in the United States of America. The only place that we are ahead of in public support for the arts happens to be Mississippi, which is the poorest state in the entire Union.
Don't censor any more art.
I feel that artists have an obligation to make their services and their talents available to help other people speak for themselves. It's not just enough to say, I have my right to speak and I'm going to exercise my right to speak. I think we have an obligation beyond that, particularly if we're in control of local media. That is, as access coordinators or as people who have shows on cable television, or people who run or have programs on community radio. The idea is that you speak for yourselves, but you also help other people speak for themselves.
I see Channel 10 as with any public access facility, as the same type of resource as a museum or a library or any other sort of community resource. It's there to be used and enjoyed by the public. And that's the direction I wanted to take Channel 10 in.
But often, no matter what the good intentions are of staff of community media, censorship is still a factor. Economics is often the reason. That's what happened in Northern California to public access producer Kay Rudin. Economics was the reason that she was censored, but obscene language and curse words were the given reason. Obscenity was used as an excuse to censor politically controversial material. Since this controversy, the producer has been barred from some future use of public access equipment, and her part-time work hours have even been cut from working at the Public Access Center. Her controversial program focused on the cutting of old redwoods in Northern California. Bad language was the reason for controversy.
This is not going to be redwood in a few hundred years.
Oh, you're going to be around in a few hundred years?
Profanities by loggers and all. I'll be the first to admit that my mouth's not as clean as it should be sometimes.
I went out to Mount Osprey Grove, came running back here at 6 o'clock, slapped together in time for the environment show. It was watched by Liz Henry, who was able the next day to reach the LP brass, stopping the cut.
This kind of environmental programming really made a difference in this community. It helped save the redwoods, but it also threatened many jobs of the loggers in the area.
Funding is the first thing that comes up. I know whenever we get calls and somebody doesn't like a particular program that they see on the channel, the first thing they ask is, well, how are you funded? You know, I mean, they immediately want to go after your money. They don't understand the concept of, all right, just change the channel, you know.
Turn the channel or make your own TV show. But often, people want to control what others see and hear, using censorship as a political tool.
These excerpts are from the September 27th televised debate. First, Colleen Bates.
I would not support legalization of drugs at this point.
The program went on as usual, and at approximately 7 minutes into the program, the TV went blank. I, thinking that there was a technical difficulty, called down to the program and talked to the night manager, whose name's Chris, and asked him if there was a problem with the tape or if it broke or what had happened. And Chris told me that the executive producer of cable channel, Public Access Channel 4, had called him and told him to pull the program, and that if I called to tell me that if I had any questions as to why the program was pulled, I could call him the next morning, therefore effectively censoring me. There's no way I could get the program back on that evening. So for 53 minutes, the TV was blank during my time period. There are other forms of censorship that can come into play, and one of those would be what I call ghetto time, whereby if the producer of the channel and his board or her board agree that they don't like your program or they don't want it on in a certain time period, they can ghettoize that program and put it on during the daytime when nobody's watching. The best time for public access is prime time, from 6:30 p.m. till 10 o'clock p.m.
Mainly because of the late night time slots that my programs sometimes are restricted to, that I feel this amounts to censorship of the pro-life message, and I feel this is wrong.
According to Professor Michael I. Meyerson, University of Baltimore School of Law, time segregation provisions are unconstitutional as applied to non-obscene materials. Pornography is not obscenity, which is a legal term requiring a jury finding that work to be obscene.
What's happening now is that we are waiting for a court. They have to decide whether a 24-hour-a-day ban against indecent speech is constitutional. And a case in the 70s, known as the Pacifica case, because a George Carlin comic monologue was aired on a Pacifica Foundation station. And the Supreme Court found, among a divided panel, that the FCC had the power to regulate something that was indecent but not obscene.
I think community radio, with the exception of some cable broadcasters, is really the last media in which people get direct access. There may be call-in shows on commercial radio, but in terms of people from the community learning how to do media, to be able to get the training to produce programs about the issues that are of concern to them, community broadcasting is really the last bastion of access. And I think it's threatened all the time. I think it's frowned upon by the FCC because there are volunteers involved as opposed to paid professional staff. I think it's frequently frowned upon by the community because it gives an uneven air sound. It's difficult to listen sometimes to community radio. We know that if it involves homosexuality or if it involves explicit language, that this commission is likely to be offended. We certainly want to be in control of what's on our air, and that's a responsibility we gladly exercise. But the role of censor and editor of material that's been published for years that is considered really classical literature, beat poets, modern-day dramatists, this is the kind of material Pacifica gets in trouble for, and we resent that. This is material that generally is on every high school curriculum. The idea that a 17-year-old should be unable to hear an unedited version of Ulysses or Grapes of Wrath or poetry or books by Alice Walker or Maya Angelou or the beat poets, we find it repressing and shocking.
I sent them home. Let the record show that.
Beyond censorship of sexual and political speech, we find access denied to public places and public meetings.
On August 28th, at a Lake Commission meeting at the Town Hall, Shrewsbury residents had their rights violated by the chairman of the meeting, Police Chief Robert McGinley. The public meeting was supposed to be cablecast live on SPAC, Shrewsbury Public Access Connection.
There's no videotaping any attack. There's no videotaping any attack.
At the meeting, Chief McGinley ordered Shrewsbury TV producers out of the meeting in a blatant violation of the open meeting law and of our First Amendment rights.
It's our basic constitutional rights of freedom of speech that we should be able to express ourselves in any way that we see fit. And I know when I had Face Your Pet come on the air, there were several attempts to stop that show because faces breed.
You're here to allow everybody to have the opportunity to speak, but that also means that you end up getting a lot of speech that is undesirable or violent or obscene or whatever. And you have to, in some respects, it's not so much that you have to support that as much as you have to support their right. And it puts you in a really difficult position to treat everyone fairly and allow that to happen. And then you got to explain it. And then, of course, you're under attack by politicians.
I guess that's it, viewers. Thanks very much for coming to City Hall with me. And this is Rick X saying good night.
And I'm not saying we shouldn't confront these people, but I think simple confrontation only gets us so far. We don't want to cut ourselves off from the people who are calling for censorship and make fun of them or not discuss anything with them. We need to keep ourselves open to listen to them and then respond. At certain times, the battle will be, the line will be drawn in the sand, if you'll pardon the cliche, and we have to take a stand. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't listen to the other side and help to explain to people why we believe as we do.
I was looking at tapes dealing with feminist response to pornography, raising questions of feminist-produced pornography. As I was selecting these wonderful clips and putting them together into my show, I found myself thinking, this show may never be able to show on Austin Access at all. Deep Dish Satellite Network has seen my rough edit and accepted it, and said that yes, they think that the few shots of the frontal nudity and etc. are perfectly appropriate and do fit into the show. And how ironic that in this Behind Censorship show, this particular show may not be able to go on.
The way to combat things that we don't like is to have more speech, to put out alternate programs, to put out alternate news stories.
You may not feel that the level of sexual innuendo and implicit violence in MTV is appropriate for your children. They're, at some young or impressionable age, and you think it's not appropriate. You have the right to ask the cable company for a device they call a lockbox to keep that channel out.
And so the access movements that I recognized in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and here we are, well into the 90s, they should never stop.
I have a 10-year-old little girl and a 12-year-old little boy, and I will tell you, the least I worry about is them seeing people who are not clothed. Arnold Schwarzenegger, it seems to me, is more obscene than somebody that doesn't have clothes on. Rightfully, society is concerned about what they're exposed to, but it is more because of a parental default. And we as parents have to do that.
Right.
And we cannot say to the state, I expect you to do that.
There are large numbers of people who are offended by government censorship, who really want their children to be able to hear great readings of material that is otherwise available to their children. And I think that the FCC needs to hear from that group.